All right. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending upon your relative time zone. I'm Randy Harris, and I'd like to welcome you here to our conference workshop. And I'm going to switch over into screen sharing for our slides. Please let me know if you're able to see the slides when I get them going here in just a second. Welcome everyone to our NACRA New View session on teaching cases online. I have a distinguished panel today to discuss teaching cases online with you, and I would like to introduce them to you here today. Our panel presenters include Armand Gilinsky from Sonoma State University, Cle-Anne Gabriel from the University of Queensland, myself, Randall Harris from Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, Geoghegan from Indiana University, Chris Cassidy, Sam Houston State University. Absent today is Vanessa Hill from the University of Lafayette, Louisiana Lafayette, and Jeff Shay from Washington and Lee University. Welcome everybody, and we're glad you're here. The learning objective for today's session is to present to you some basic and intermediate methods of teaching cases in an online classroom environment. And we're going to draw upon our experience in a number of classroom situations to give you some tips and tools and techniques that we hope you will immediately be able to bring back to your online classroom in our COVID-challenged environment. But before we get into the actual tips and tools, I'd like to set the stage for you with some pre-planning considerations. How do you set the stage for your online case instruction? Okay, so I've introduced the panel participants, talked about the learning objectives. Let me pass on now to Jeff Shay for a pre-planning discussion.
So transitioning to teaching online requires really reconsidering your course design, what you're assigning, and how that all aligns with your learning objectives. I learned early from my mentor professors that there's a significant difference between covering material that will be committed to short-term memory and teaching material that will be transferable to our students' careers. It's a very important difference between covering and teaching. We have to resist the urge in the online world to just cover material and instead need to consider how we might teach more purposefully in ways that help students best achieve and retain their learning objectives. So I broke it down into three different things here: design, assign, and align. And in design, we need to consider how will we deliver the course content and assure that learning takes place. So we need to make decisions such as, are we going to be synchronous or asynchronous? Or are we going to have a hybrid of both? Are we going to have lecture? Can we still use things like experiential exercises? Or will it be a hybrid? And you have to ask yourself the question with the design at the early stage: are you designing your course with purpose? Really thinking about it, rethinking in this new world. The next one is assign. Do your assignments capture the assessment of student learning? The typical decisions that we have are similar to what we have with a normal in-person course. Are we going to have case discussions? Or are we going to have write-ups? We're going to have exams, or is it going to be a hybrid of all of those different options? And then even things like case presentations. Are we going to have the students present as a team, or are they going to present as individuals? And the last part of the assignments, for me at least, is the rhythm of the assignments. There is some benefit to having frequent assignments, but that may sacrifice deep learning. If you have less frequent assignments, you sacrifice the possibility that, or you have the possibility that some students may not keep up with the work, but you can provide more copious feedback on the work that they do submit. So the question there is, are you assigning student work with purpose? And the last part is going back, and when you have your design and your assignments all worked out, You need to go back and make sure that you map or align your choices with the learning objectives. So you ask the question, does your design and what you assign actually align with your learning objectives? To me, this is teaching with purpose. Randy?
All right, with that in mind then, let's go in and take a look at some synchronous online learning tips and tools. On to Jeff Shay.
Wow, it's back to me, Randy. One of the things, I've taught case teaching and research seminars, been fortunate enough to teach them around the world. And perhaps the biggest fear we have, and I think for me at least, it's been exacerbated in the online world, is students not preparing. They either will not prepare or they don't prepare for a discussion, or that the student preparation is unstructured. It's just they go in directions that maybe isn't best for discussing the case. And the student discussion ends up having contributions that are rather cavalier. Some people may not like it. It fits with my personality, but I basically tell my students, people don't care what you think or believe unless you can back it up with rigorous analysis. So how can you assure that your students are going to actually conduct some sort of rigorous analysis and that it's going to be relevant? What I do is I've developed these analysis templates for each one of the courses that I teach, and I have the students complete them and submit them prior to the case discussion. Randy, next slide, please. So just as an example, this is a model that I've developed over the years. It's kind of expanded. For those of you in marketing, it started off as Abel's framework, but then I expanded it. It's not designed right now, just so everybody knows, it's not designed for you to be able to read these online, but it ensures that the students and the teams that they work on, that they conduct analysis. Up in the upper left, it's stakeholder descriptions. The upper right is the stakeholders' needs, pains, and gains. In the middle, this one is tailored towards entrepreneurship. So it's the 3 M's of opportunities. The bottom left is the resources, and over on the right is the capabilities, and the lower center is core and distinctive competencies. So if you think about it, if you're teaching strategy or entrepreneurship, if you had your students fill these out with all of the stakeholders, the resources and capabilities, the distinctive competencies and the core competencies, you're much better able to discuss the case, and you're able to assess whether the students have read the case beforehand. To give you another model that I think every business professor has seen before, Randy, go to the next slide. So the next one is Porter's 5 forces, and we know that it includes the threat of new entrants, supplier power, buyer power, industry rivalry, and the threat of substitutes. So Randy, next slide. So what I do in my courses to assure that the students have prepped is I assign 1 to 2 models at the start of the course, and then I have them add each week to that. So in week 2, for the second case, they might have 3 or 4 models total. It would include the 2 from the first week and then 2 more from the second week. The students become more efficient in learning the models. They become, they're more able to, I find, subsequently in their professional careers, apply the models with confidence because they've practiced them several times. And what I do also is I ask the students who to note on the models when they submit them, who did each model for that particular case study, to assure that one student doesn't become the value chain expert and that's the only thing that they learn for the semester. What happens with this method is that the students learn through repetition, and the learning objectives are achieved in terms of being able to transfer that to their careers later. One note here is that I do provide the templates, and this gets back to my comments before in regards to teaching with purpose. My courses are generally the courses I teach are strategy, entrepreneurship, and international business. My course is not in PowerPoint. Although the students should learn PowerPoint, that's a skill set aside to the content that I'm teaching. So I provide the templates so that the students are not spending 3 hours on creating a Porter's 5 Forces model and then only 30 minutes on the content and actually using those tools. So a reminder again, these templates are for the analysis, and I have to tell the students this, they're not for presentation because they basically defy every presentation rule out there. So if people want a set of these, you can email me after the presentation, and I'd be happy to share the ones that I have for entrepreneurship. You can take a look and use them in your own classrooms. But in conclusion, I do find that this really does help assure that my students are well prepared for a discussion, because I can ask anything that they should basically know through their analysis. Randy, back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd like to hand over the floor now to Will Geoghegan, who's going to discuss with us whiteboarding co-creation.
Thanks, Randy. You can skip on to the next slide with the video if you want. That would be great. So I'm going to stream Randy's going to stream a video, just about 60 seconds, just to illustrate some of the use cases of some of these whiteboarding sites. So a lot of us may have used Mural or Miro or Klaxoon, and I find them really, really helpful in online case instruction. So this video here, it starts to illustrate basically what I've asked the students to do is to post their favorite products from the Trader Joe's case study that many of you guys may have used. Anytime, if it does work. Cool. So this is a brief 60 seconds where you see them co-creating, collaborating all at once. And what I have at the end of it is, ironically, a mural or a different perspectives as to the favorite products that they have. When I use these tools for case analysis, this is for the whole group. What you'll notice is that what I'll talk about in a second is the use case in breakout rooms. So they're really good for collaboration. They're really good for templates. I could potentially borrow some of Jeff's templates that he was just talking about to actually position into Mural. They're really good for engagement and getting introverts to contribute. I also find that putting a timer on these allows us to stay within the time. I have a timer on me right now because I have 4 minutes to discuss Mural. I also find that one of the things we miss when we teach online is that we're missing our whiteboard or our blackboard. So this basically facilitates that. And unlike our physical class whiteboard and blackboard, we have pretty much limitless space in these online whiteboarding tools. So you can skip on to the next one if you want, Randy, where it shows the finished product, I guess. So this is after 4 minutes of the students all posting their favorite products from Trader Joe's on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, I'm asking them to post photographs as to what a typical Trader Joe's experience is. So I almost use this as, first of all, as an icebreaker to get everyone sharing any of the people who have love for Trader Joe's. So that's in the first 3 or 4 minutes. If you could skip to the next slide, Randy, please. And if you could play the next video, you can see that the template here is my 4 pastures for that detailed discussion of Trader Joe's. So the video that's going to play in a second is just one of those pastures, the value chain analysis. In the template, this was all blank. The students have added their own sticky notes or post-it notes, and they're in the process of trying to draw linkages across these activities to show the mutual reinforcement and alignment. So again, I've used it both in the holistic class experience, and I've also used it for smaller breakout rooms. So right now I'm going to click a share in the chat pod to the template of Trader Joe's in Mural. All of you guys, if we were doing a real class, you could contribute across those 4 pastures right now if you wished. So as I said, I really like Mural. There are other tools that achieve very, very similar goals. Miro is really, really good. Klaxoon is really, really good. Just to bring your whiteboard to your online case discussion. And as I said, the use case for me is for the whole class potentially to contribute, or having a mural that is specific to each breakout room. So 4 or 5 people can work on their own individual mural and then report back at the end of maybe 15 or 20 minutes. So each of those 4 postures, basically 20 minutes, where I allow the students to build out their insights, and then we report back, and I'll ask one group to share their outcomes or their insights after that breakout session. Thanks, Randy.
Thank you. I'd like to turn the floor over now to Chris Cassidy for just some more discussion about synchronous online learning.
The 2 classes I primarily teach are strategy and the social responsibility of management. And the objectives for both of these courses, because they're senior level courses, oriented around problem solving and critical thinking, which are 2 of the harder learning objectives to teach. They're unstructured. There's no right answer. The class acts like a brainstorming session. And the best and most effective use of our synchronous time together requires that the students come fully prepared. Next slide. Teaching those learning objectives, because they're such higher order thinking, is a challenge. And as we've transitioned from face-to-face classes, where you can use a little bit of teacher pressure and there's some team peer-to-peer pressure to get students to be prepared, well, you move online and they're sitting at home and perhaps in the kitchen or their study or their living room, and they're not as accountable as they were before. Added to that, there's absences. There's absences due to technology issues. The laptop runs out of the battery. There's some institutional barriers as they keep changing from one mode to another. These rapid change leave students in the dust. There's communication problems, not just because of the technology, but they're not used to getting their information through other channels. In addition, I've had plenty of students become quarantined or ill during the COVID crisis. And in addition, I've got some ADA students that have hearing or visual barriers, and the technology doesn't always keep up with them. Realizing that the history of pandemics is that this COVID-19 pandemic is just one in a long series. These are going to continue occurring. And if it's not COVID, it'll be hurricanes or it'll be something else. And so we need to overcome some of these challenges. Next slide. Now, the incentives in the online environment are harder. The incentives undermine superior student performance. The students can log in and turn off their camera and microphone, and it's really hard to tell if the students are there. Students have claimed, don't have a camera. I lost you on audio. And in the meantime, you don't know if they're surfing the internet or visiting the kitchen for a sandwich. In addition, my own institution requires we record sessions, so if a student isn't there, they can just watch the recording. And so they can actually be absent from a large portion of the in-class discussion. So the incentives undermine this. So we need to address the issue Jeff addressed earlier, which is how do you build in that incentive? Next slide, please. So the key to incentivizing student preparation for these synchronous sessions is the same as for face-to-face teaching. It's just you got to do things a little bit different. And so I've done a variety of assignments that the students have to prepare before they come to class. And it's a tiered step. First, they do a quiz on the material that we're going to cover, a quiz both on the theoretical content as well as the case we're going to discuss. Then there's a written assignment, usually completed using our learning management system. We use Blackboard, but it can be done in any of the learning management systems. The writing assignments may be 1 or 2 before they get to the point where they're actually conducting a part of the analysis before even attending class. I set the deadlines so that all of these assignments are done about 24 hours prior to the session, which gives me the time to go and check the student performance, and I can build in around the gaps in student learning. I can call on the students with the most rudimentary understanding first and get the basics out of them, and then I can call on the students who answer the questions well to build upon that basic foundation. And that way everybody gets a participation, and the students who perhaps prepared in a cursory way get the added benefit of seeing how well the better students are able to perform. Next slide. The key to all this, though, is what's going on during the actual synchronous discussion. I typically use some type of Socratic questioning method, which asks everybody questions about the case. I'll sometimes pick specific students to answer specific questions because I know they at least address that question. But then I award the points for the contributions they make to the discussion. And these contributions can be thought of as how good a comment did they make. And so there are positive contributions and there are negative contributions. A positive contribution is valuable to the class and the other class members. A negative contribution is costly to the class because we could have been using that time for something more valuable. Early in the semester, I award the points very generously just for opening their mouths. Later on, they were only earned for actually making substantive contributions that help the other students understand the issues in the case. There's almost always those students who come up with something profound or really insightful about a case, sometimes things I never thought of. And for those students, I always give them some type of verbal accolades, praise, and additional points to help incentivize both them and the other students to be more fully involved. Let me turn it on back to Randy.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn it over now to Cle-Anne Gabriel for some discussion about Padlets and also guest protagonists.
Thanks, Randy. So what I'm going to present to you today is just 3 examples of approaches and tools that I've used to teach with cases online. And they do align with some of the pedagogical concerns that the others have had raised previously, such as incentivizing preparation and participation and such. So one of the first tools I use is Padlet. And Padlet is great for my purposes because it allows me to have students collaborate within their small groups on using this online platform. And I can also mark them on their participations, contributions, and their preparation before class. So in my classroom, we put students into these breakout rooms, my virtual classroom, into breakout rooms. And the breakout rooms, of course, have these group numbers assigned to them, if you can see those slides. And the very first thing students need to do when they come into my learning environment is they need to show evidence of preparation. So that's their readiness assurance. And I assign the first 5 minutes of every class to uploading their preparation work. I also use templates. So they will have had a template posted on Blackboard based on the case study that they will need to fill out, and they'll need to respond and do some sort of analysis prior to coming into that learning environment. And then they've got 5 minutes to upload it onto the Padlet within their respective groups. Now, the 5-minute time is just enough time to get for students who have technical trouble or who need to log in, but it's not enough time to actually do the preparation well, or to scramble to do it at the last minute. So they actually have to do it before they come into the learning environment. And what I do is, I'm happy to answer questions about Padlet for those who are unfamiliar with the platform. After that first 5 minutes of preparation time and they've all uploaded their preparation, I download the Padlet at that 5-minute point. And I keep that as a record of preparation. And then we carry on with the discussion in each of the groups. And we move around to the breakout rooms and engage in that discussion with them about the case. And they nominate a scribe and one person uploads their work on that case. So they're usually engaging in some sort of discussion. They need to make a decision, make a choice, and they need to write down their decision as a team and upload that into Padlet as well. So, and it's all collaborative. They're co-creating I also use Mural as William mentioned. They're co-creating at the same time and they're participating. And I'm going into each of their rooms, into each of the groups, and I'm also asking them questions, asking them Socratic questions. And it's easy for me to see who's actually there. So either students actually have their mics on and I can hear them and they respond to my questions, or for equity issues, I allow students to write something into the chat. Sometimes they have a Google Docs going that they're sharing amongst themselves. And if they can't do the chat because they come up with all kinds of excuses, then I will go into their Google Docs and I can sort of see who is there. So I use a variety of ways to see who's actually present and sort of contributing to the group work in the Padlets. At the end of each class session, Randy, if you could skip to the next slide, please. What you download is this big PDF. The PDF, the final PDF of the Padlet includes their individual preparation work, which has their names on it, as well as the group write-up. And so I have downloaded 2 Padlets that I can then mark. I can mark their work, I mark their preparation, I mark their contributions. And then we go back to the larger room in Zoom or whichever tool you use for online learning, and we consolidate and bring ideas together. And I found this to be really, really effective when using Teams for case discussion. I think Padlet is a wonderful tool. And students can either simply copy and paste text directly into Padlet or upload their own Word document. And you can click the document from the PDF and you can open it, you can check it and turn it in for plagiarism as well. So it's actually quite handy for actually marking their work. Next slide, please, Randy. So another thing, and so this is the second thing I wanted to mention, and I'm sure all of you here as experienced case teachers, you've invited guests into your classroom, particularly if it's a guest protagonist, the actual decision maker from the case. I would argue that there's an advantage to now having to switch to online, in that you can now access protagonists who may previously have been located remotely, and you may not actually been able to have them physically come into your face-to-face classroom. And now, because the technology, Zoom, for example, is so widespread and widely available, I've had quite a good experience bringing in protagonists of the case that I'm using simply to join us via Zoom. And what they do is they come into the breakout rooms with me and they're interacting with the students. And that's sort of a great incentive for students as well, because they get really engaged. The actual decision maker is there in their breakout room, in their team of about 8 students, and asking them questions and challenging them. And so we had to, on this slide here, there's a photo we used, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation as a case study that we've written up at my university. And we had the head of the ABC's Indigenous and Diversity initiatives for the entire country. She could Zoom in, and that was such a great opportunity for our students to hear from this national decision maker using Zoom. So I do think that there are some disadvantages, but there are some advantages and things that we can capitalize on with the move to online teaching. So the last slide for me, please, Randy. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to share this. It's still sort of experimental. We trialed this for the first time this semester. We trialed an outdoor classroom. Now, when I say we have been a naughty academic, I need to slap myself on the wrist here. I should have put my colleague's name on this slide, Dr. Stuart Middleton. I really should acknowledge him. So we work within the same sort of team, teaching management, teaching strategy, but he's the one who coordinated this aspect of the teaching. So what we did is we took our students, the students who are available and on campus outdoors. And the university, it was a bit challenging to get approval for it, but the university set up these bean bags, as you can see on the grass. We set up sort of whiteboards. They're in these teams permanently for the semester, and they're socially distanced. And they must just come back, return straight directly to the same teams every single week, working together. But the thing about this is that although they're there in person, they're working online. So each team has a laptop or a few different laptops with them. And there are also students who are not there in person, who are online and interacting via Zoom, also using Padlet or other tools. And they're collaborating across the face-to-face and the online as well to come up with solutions to the case challenges that they're facing. So, but I want to end this by saying this has been great, and Stuart deserves the credit for this. I really should have put his name there, but we do work in the same team. The university is actually looking to expand this initiative to do more of this online, of the outdoor classroom, because it does sort of meet the COVID guidelines. The caveat I must stress, though, is that we are located in the state of Queensland in Australia. And we've somehow luckily managed to have COVID reasonably under control. So it's perhaps easier for us to do something like this compared to, say, the state of Victoria or New South Wales in Australia. So that's a caveat. If you're in a COVID hotspot, perhaps your university won't be able to do something like this, but I believe it's aspirational. And I think COVID has given us the incentive to do it, but I can see us sticking with it long term because it's such a great way to learn, to sit out in nature, discussing a case on these bean bags, and the students, by all accounts, really do enjoy it. Okay, that's it from me for now. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Cle-Anne. I'd like to turn our attention now to asynchronous online learning. For many reasons, students have come to almost expect asynchronous instruction where they are not able to be physically present at their computer at a specific time. This has proven particularly helpful for online MBA programs where students may be geographically separated, perhaps even in separate time zones or continents. And it poses a unique set of challenges for instructors. So I'd like to turn our attention to asynchronous learning in this section. Professor Hill was not able to be here today, but some of her comments is that it really upends your assumptions about the classroom. And it's necessary then in order to reframe your case teaching around the asynchronous format. Technology mediates, and it's important to have something that is tangible and useful to the student, even if the instructor is not physically present or online. One of the examples of this, one tool that Professor Hill has used is called VoiceThread, and I'm going to play a short example of VoiceThread for you here today.
Is anyone else hearing it? It's not coming through, Randy.
Are we not getting the sound on that?
Nope, it's not
Hello?
coming.
Okay, then we'll move on then to the next slide. I'll hand it back to Will Geoghegan, who's going to talk a little bit about video cases and
Thanks,
play
Randy.
pause. Will?
I'm back again. Just wanted to talk a little bit about ways to engage students in an asynchronous manner. So one of the ways in which I've found particularly useful is through a tool or a company, I guess, called PlayPosit. Some of you guys may have heard of PlayPosit. There's another tool called Edpuzzle as well. So basic contention or the basic goal of PlayPosit is to engage students. You can click to the next slide, Randy, if that's okay. And you can click through pretty much all the animations if you wish. So the basic premise here is to try and engage students as they're watching videos. What I've found is that there's only a certain amount of 20-page Harvard cases that they can read over the course of the semester. And what I have tried to do is to integrate video cases into a lot of different topics where it's applicable. I found a lot of really good video cases. There's a lot of really topical ones where 20, 30 minutes, and ironically, I find that in many cases, there's more depth and a stronger learning outcome in some of these video cases than in some of the traditional written cases. When it comes to the application of PlayPosit, what I'm trying to push here is that it's not just putting a 20-minute CNBC video up. What I really enjoy is to try and have interactions, basically, and that's what PlayPosit does. I try and put maybe 10 to 12 interactions embedded into a video, and I'll show you an example of this in a second. But everything from a multiple choice question asking, well, what is the mode of international entry that company X in the video is trying to achieve, to a discussion question where they can see all of their classmates' discussions, postings at that point in time in the video embedded, to a poll that I can then use in the live class. So there's a variety of different interaction options in PlayPosit. It's integrated into the learning management system so that you can even download it as grades. So you can have multiple choice, you can check boxes, you can have free responses, you can have fill in the blanks, you can have poll questions, you can have discussion boards. And what I particularly like is that what many of our students do in a video case like this is they'll fast forward at a 3x speed. So I'm going to limit their fast forwarding abilities in the vast majority of times so that they have to watch it at 1x speed. And if they get something wrong, a lot of times I'll push them back 2 minutes to rewatch that segment of the video. So they're coming to my class fully prepared, and I allocate grades with these video responses or interactions. So Randy, if you could click on the next slide and start the video, that would be great. So this is an example. This is in our learning management system. We use Canvas. So the video scrolls through like a student would. It goes to the module as to where I have my video. You'll see that the video opens up for the student. They press play eventually on the video. The instructions are pretty clear that they get grades for responding to these different questions. This is a video of the ski resort industry in North America. So it's about a 15-minute video. I'm going to share the link to the video if anyone's interested in actually responding to these questions in a second. There is audio here, but the audio is not working, obviously. And what you'll notice in a second, the question will pop up for the student to answer. So the question that will pop up on the left-hand side of the screen pertains. The video just stopped there, Randy. So yeah, cool. So the question pops up here. If you're doing an analysis for the ski resort industry, where would the ski lift manufacturers fit? Which was the basic overview in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the video. So I've answered it, pretending I'm a student as a supplier. I get 1 point out of 1 point, and then I press play. So you can see engaging the students, framing it into the learning outcomes or the theoretical application that you're looking for, and also having these open-ended discussion board type facilities allows for the students to really get their hands dirty into the case application. I'm going to post the link to the ski resort industry video for anyone who is interested. And yeah, that's me. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit now about structuring your case assignments and discussion boards for asynchronous online learning. One piece of advice that I got early on that I did not fully appreciate at the time was actually Stephen Covey's quote, start with the end in mind. And in general, what this means in application is that you want to match your cases and your case assignments with the learning objectives of your instructional module. So what I've increasingly done with my case assignments is I've actually started with the learning outcome first and building around that to pick cases and also to build assignments. The other issue relates to Bloom's taxonomy, particularly with regard to graduate education, where you're moving higher up Bloom's taxonomy towards synthesis, where the students actually are able to engage in not just problem resolution, but also problem identification. This is the highest order of learning for case analysis, and it's only something that I'm willing to do with graduate students now, because undergraduates will oftentimes struggle with actually identifying problems in cases. So I typically will try to ground problem resolution around, here is the problem for you to solve in the case, versus graduate education, where I'll actually allow them to engage in the problem identification themselves. One way to resolve this problem at the undergraduate level is a series of forced choices, and I'll give you an example of that here today. So to look at graduate education, you want to structure your case assignments in such a way that you allow for synthesis and learning in the case. And you also want to provide some type of framework for them to begin the work on the case itself. I have an example here of a synthesis assignment for graduate students around Mattel Incorporated, and I've given them two broad targets to examine. One, immediate crisis response to the global COVID pandemic, and then also how to restore positive sales growth and profitability for the company. This forces the students to engage not only in problem identification, but also resolution. Hopefully, your students are able to synthesize the elements of the case and to bring out the elements that will need examination and eventual resolution. Oftentimes in the early case assignments, students will struggle, particularly when I don't provide them a clear focus for their problem identification. A series of feedback to students on assignments and perhaps an exemplar after the first case assignment's returned can be very helpful in closing the loop on that learning. In other words, the less structure you provide, the more difficult it becomes for the students and the more anxiety provoking, at least at first. I find that my students generally begin to get the hang of it after a case or two, however. With undergraduates, however, I'm much more directive. And again, starting with the end in mind, I try to build around the learning objective specifically and then build the case into the learning objective. So in this example, I actually give them a forced choice on the assignment. In other words, pick one of these 5 competitive strategies and argue why it is in fact a best classification for the company in question, in this case, Fitbit. And then I provide a lot of background in the textbook for them to go back to refer to. And so this is an example of what I mean by forced choice, where you provide them a very clear structure, a very clear theoretical framework to apply to the case study itself, even down to the actual page length and how I would like the answer structured. Moving on to discussion boards, the same basic principle applies, where you provide a company, perhaps a case study, and then you begin to examine it from one particular theoretical lens. In this case, corporate social responsibility. You may also tie it to other links inside the case or inside the textbook chapter, including the triple bottom line, sustainability, and other topics within the global CSR topic. So these are some examples of ways to structure learning for written assignments for students that provides focus and also theoretical rigor in your classroom. So hopefully those provide some tips for you for asynchronous learning. I'd like to now look at some blended methods of learning, the blended synchronous asynchronous learning model, or premium economy. And for that, I'd like to introduce Professor Armand Gilinsky.
See ya, we've run
Armand?
out of time. Oh, wait a minute, I can't see. There's some 40-odd people I can't even see on this session. Yeah, that's a shame. Janice, how you doing? Where are you? Do you know I'm only 35 miles away from you, but I'm right in your living room right now, invading your space. Hey, Will, what's happening with you? What's you curious about these days? Armand, is that how you pronounce your name? What do you teach? What are you learning? What are you still just hoping to learn? And well, I've taught online, asynchronous and synchronous. I've used some of these tools in the past for 10 years and taught hybrid mode. And now I'm in a new era where my students have lost their homes in fires and other disasters, have lost their jobs because of the economic depression, and some of them have lost family members due to the current coronavirus pandemic. So I had to rethink how I teach starting in March. And I thought to myself, how can I individualize a learning environment in a distant and cold medium like Zoom or Meet or some other WebEx or some other format. So I created what I call a premium economy model, where students have the ability to talk to me and share what they're learning. Yes, like other people like Randy and Jeff and others, there's some Socratic learning that goes on. My course has been, a strategy course, has been designated as a writing intensive course by my university. And I think Maria, who teaches at a Cal State University, knows what I'm talking about. So they meet their undergraduate writing requirement. They have to discuss in groups all the cases, and then they have to, after the discussion, they have to write individual analyses of each of the cases. And I give them a template similar to what Jeff would give them to write those analyses. And they get feedback. And somebody mentioned about earlier in the chat about scaffolding assignments, and the purpose of the feedback is to scaffold those assignments. And that's pretty much an asynchronous task. It's pretty cold, and the students feel like, well, you know, might as well just have a robot teach the course. In fact, is it a robot teaching this course? Or am I going to be replaced by a robot teaching this course in the future? I don't know. Maybe the university, with its budget crisis, will find a way to do that. So instead, what I decided to do is add on to that and overlay, instead of trying to teach an 80-minute class discussion with the Hollywood Squares, or some of you old enough remember the Beatty Bunch model, where you have all these faces on a screen, some of whom are in the doing laundry at the same time and wondering if their clothing is dry, and others are distracted because they have pets running across their laps, or even worse, they have siblings or parents breathing down their neck because they're using up all the bandwidth in the house. So I signed them up for individual or small group tutorials. I set aside what would normally be class time for these tutorials, and I start with a clear agenda, and I stick to that agenda. I let them know what that agenda is going to be. And like I mentioned with Janice and Armand and Maria and Will and Randy and others, I try to first do a check-in to find out what's going on in their lives and what makes them curious, and where they're finding themselves having problems. And then I review the learning objectives of the course with each student individually. There's only 4 learning objectives, and those are to describe, evaluate, generate, and recommend. That's about all I can remember. And I think it's important for the students to remember that, because that provides a platform for them to do the discussions, the issue briefs, the midterm exams, and the group project. And I also do quick assessments. So I might say, well, you know, Randy, you've been studying organizations in crisis, and what do automobile manufacturers and airline manufacturers that are facing crises over faulty or perceived faulty products have in common? What do they do differently? Well, let's talk about that for a couple of minutes. And how is that impacting their strategy? So I might do a quick assessment, and that prevents students from procrastinating doing the assignments, and it also increases their productivity on future assignments. I also require a weekly reflection log. In other words, I ask students to keep writing at least about 30 minutes a day, what they're learning, what they should be learning, and where they would go to find out the answers to their questions about the assignments, about life after graduation, which is seriously on a lot of students' minds, because by the time I see them, they have already 1 foot out the door. And they turn in those written reflection logs twice in the semester. The first time will be next week, October 14th, and then the last day of the semester, December 4th. And these are confidential, but this gives me a sense of what students, where students are, and what they've learned, and what they still need to learn, because I think that's a really important part of the undergraduate experience, is to find out what you know, but also to figure out what you don't know and how you're going to go about finding out the answers to that. And then finally, just to keep it short, because I know you want to have some time for Q&A, I think it's really important my mantra, at least this semester, is to be very patient and understanding and persistent. And with students who are working in teams, it's really difficult for them to find a time to work together, or a way to work together, in some cases even the technology to work together. So I ask them to practice this with each other, and of course with anyone that they come in contact with, whether it be they're stuck at home with their families or stuck alone in an apartment. You know, be patient. Things will change, and be understanding. That means you have to be able to be a little flexible and be persistent. Keep working, keep doing the assignments. Every assignment in the course is posted at the very beginning. We're using Canvas now. There's no gotchas or mystery assignments. Everything is there. They can finish the course in a week, but of course everything is sort of platformed and built So it's going to take them a little longer than a week to complete a semester-long course. Thank you for watching and listening today. Randy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Armand, and like to thank all of you for joining us here today. We would certainly encourage you to ask some questions. I think this format probably lends itself to the chat box as best as possible. So I'm going to back out of this presentation, and then we will open it up for questions. If the panel participants could help with the discussion, I'd appreciate it at this point. Thank you. Or you guys have been actually talking in the chat since the presentation started.
For Chris, do you think it's helpful to hide other students' answers till they post their answers?
I'll go ahead and field that one because that is an issue that has come up, that when my students do see what the other students are writing, they just plagiarize it. Or they learn from each other real quick. By hiding the initial submission, they have to compose an original answer themselves. Then I generally have them provide feedback on each other's comments. Now, at this point, they're reading each other's, they can cherry pick the good ideas, and there's a little bit of, call it homogenization of the ideas that show up in the papers. But there's definitely learning that goes on from peer to peer as well as from the comments that I provide.
Do you see blended courses as the future for all classes even after the COVID crisis ends? And the answer, in my opinion, is yes. How many of us have to post grades and feedback to Blackboard or to Moodle or Canvas as part of our regular feedback, even in a face-to-face classroom? In other words, the introduction of video and other technologies is really an extension of the classroom. I think it's a question of the continuum, and we may pull back, but I don't think that once we've opened up the gate that we're going to retreat back to the traditional face-to-face techniques.
The only thing that I
see that probably
is that sometimes we're speaking in generalizations here, and I think that it's important. Like the one of the slides that we missed by our colleague who's fighting off the storm is just to think about your audience. So a lot of this depends on the audience that you have at your school, and understanding that context is really important. So there are a bunch of tools. I teach at a small liberal arts school. We only have 15 students. We're all undergrad with a law program. We have 15 students in the class. A lot of the tools we're using, I'm going to continue to use, and they're going to enhance. But I'm probably not going to be teaching. My school will basically go back to an in-person model. So we're not going to all of a sudden start offering, I don't think, online courses. But it depends. I would say for the vast majority of schools, it's probably right. 75% of all schools are now going to offer online, courses and things.
Thank you.
Okay. I was just going to also comment on the question about, do we get students to wait until they've posted before they, so they don't look at each other's work? So normally, I think I mentioned this in the chat, I use Turnitin as a bit of a deterrent, but I'm not overly concerned if they do that. For me, it's the process, it's the skills they get out of it. If they do see a student, another group's response that is better, they've hopefully learned what better looks like, and there's some learning there as well in terms of writing technique and such. So I'm not overly concerned by that, because usually by the end of a semester anyway, they're so busy and engaged in the case that they don't have much time to see what the other groups are doing.
Thank you. If virtual classes continue, will the cases go shorter due to time constraints? Any thoughts?
We're already seeing that with the students in the current generation. They don't like the 25-page Harvard cases anymore. They like the 10-page or the 8-page, and they really like the 3- and 4-page. What we're likely to see is shorter and more video.
It depends on the audience,
if not
I believe. So undergrads, I personally find the 10 to 20-page Harvard cases are wasted on them. I find that smaller vignettes are better at an undergraduate level, and then the depth or the the detail that's needed for a good graduate level discussion needs to potentially be one of those longer cases. So I think when we discuss different audiences, the suitability that Jeff talked about earlier when you design your class needs to be appropriate for sure.
William, can you follow up with Janet on a question about
Janice
PlayPosit
is asking
and
a
pros and
question, I
cons
think,
on
about her
PlayPosit?
own pre-recorded like lectures, the shorter videos, and I've used PlayPosit and Edpuzzle for that. Basically, one of the things that's frustrating, I guess, is that when we record asynchronous videos, it tends to go down a black hole. There are better students watch the asynchronous videos, but we have no accountability if they do or do not. So what I like to do with my own asynchronous videos, if I'm discussing a tool or a framework or a book chapter, I'll insert comprehension checks using PlayPosit throughout that video. And then I'll reward students for having answered those questions. The questions are relatively easy, but it keeps you engaged. It keeps you interested in the material if you have an active role. And that's something that me personally, I found really, really helpful in the students' responses. Has been really, really positive on this, that they are now rewarded for watching the videos and they are also an active participant in the videos.
Thank you. A question from Maria about assessment and engagement. How do we know students are really doing their own work in an online environment? We'd like to chime in on that. A contentious issue, so I'll just talk about my own university as an example. We had some difficulties with the online monitoring, particularly the video supervisors, that type of thing. So Examity actually went offline in the middle of the crisis sometime in April, May, because of the shutdowns in India, Bangalore, and one other city in India in particular. There are others, including Respondus, which is a lockdown browser, but I've actually kicked it down to SafeAssign or to another competitor. That's just because of the constraints of using live monitoring. But you're right, academic integrity is an ongoing issue and we're kind of in an arms race. I will note that Professor Gilinsky's cases are particularly famous and popular on Course Hero, among other places. Including your instructor manuals and so forth. So we're in an arms race, definitely. Fresh cases and fresh material is one of the ways that I'm able to overcome that. We rotate in material very, very quickly. Cases, we chew up a lot of cases as a result to try to stay ahead of this somewhat. I hope that helps, Maria, at least somewhat with your question. Do others have ideas or thoughts?
One suggestion I've got is if you switch over to assignments that require the students to compose in writing. Like Armand, my classes are writing intensive. And the more you ask the students to write and the more they have to do that's original, the harder it is for one student to do another student's work because they just won't do the writing for each other, but they'll take quizzes and tests for each other.
All right, I'd like to thank our panel participants here today, Armand Gilinsky, Jeff Shay, Will Geoghegan, Chris Cassidy, and Cle-Anne Gabriel. Good morning, Cle-Anne. And I'd like to thank all of you, our studio audience, for being here today and participating with us. We're grateful for your participation in our session. Thank you, and I hope that you have a successful and productive NACRA conference. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Randy.
And,